morning, guys and gals, anyone watching. Welcome back to my channel. I apologize for the lack of content. I'm just trying to get things going in the spring garden, so I kind of felt like if I kept doing videos out in the garden that it was just kind of the same thing over and over and over and over again. So I haven't done anything. I'm letting certain things that I've planted kind of grow a little bit so I can give more of an update. So that won't be too long, hopefully, and then I'll be showing what's going on. But yeah, I just didn't want to constantly show the same thing. This lighting is terrible. The sun's coming right in my window and making me look completely washed out, but I don't really have any control over that. But anyways, I wanted to talk a little bit about watering, since here in Florida it's starting to get to the time of year where it's warming up, and at least right now in my area it's our quote-unquote dry season, if you want to call it that. It's not rainy. You know the old saying, April showers bring May flowers? Well, that doesn't really apply here. Usually this is a pretty dry time of year for us, and then when summer rolls around is when we start getting our daily rain, and hopefully that'll be the case this year, because I think we are possibly in a La Nina weather pattern, which is not always the best when you're wanting water, but we'll see what happens. So when it comes to watering, I think a lot of people, and I'm still not an expert, there are plenty of times that I screw up and don't do it right. I water too much, water not enough, that sort of thing. But the concept should be you want to water deeply, because you want your plants to send roots down as deep as possible. So the mistake is to water a little bit every day. You know, even if the top, because you'll water. I know for me, sometimes I'll run the sprinkler and then I'll go out and, you know, later that day or the next day, it already seems like it's completely dry. And, you know, your first instinct is going to be to grab the hose or the watering can, and this is terrible lighting. There, that's a little better. Grab the watering can, grab the sprinkler or whatever, and run it again. And that's not the right idea. Now, if you're planting in a very tight, I forgot the name of it, biointensive type style garden, you may have to water more frequently, because you've got so many plants competing for root space in one area that they need more water. Otherwise, they're gonna compete with each other and cause problems. But this is more for a standard garden, a standard in-ground garden, kind of like what I do, or more spaced out, that sort of thing. The idea is to water deeply and water every few days. And that may seem counterintuitive, but like I said, the concept, the idea is you want your plants to send their roots down deep, looking for water and looking for nutrients. So if you water a little bit every day, then the top layer of the soil is getting wet, but the bottom is staying dry. Deep down, it's staying dry. And so the plants, instead of sending their roots down looking for water and nutrients, they send their roots out. And so they stay very shallow. And that leads to a weaker plant, and it leads to a plant that's not able to take care of itself as well. You're going to have to constantly water. You're going to have to constantly feed them because their roots are so shallow that they're not getting the nutrients and the water that's deep down in the soil. So, and it also makes for less stable plants because their roots aren't down deep and holding them in place. So the concept is water deeply every few days. Like I tend to water every 2 to 3 days. I like to go 3 days. And I try to water for minimum. Now with my garden, I have to break it up into halves. I have to water one half and water the back half, that sort of thing. I do a minimum each half of the garden of half an hour. That's a minimum. And here lately, because it's been so dry, I've been bumping that up to 45 minutes. And then I don't water again until at least 2 days go by, if not 3. Again, it also depends on the weather, if it's warming up, if it's dry, that sort of thing. But because what I want is, like I said, I want my plant's roots to go down deep and not out to the side shallow. So one thing you can do to kind of check to see the water level in your soil is to kind of take your hand and just kind of dig down a little bit, not very far, but just a little bit, because the top layer that's exposed to the elements is obviously going to dry out faster because it's exposed to the sun, it's exposed to the wind. So the very, very top, the surface that you can see is not the best indicator of if your soil is too dry. And I think the mistake is that people tend to do that. They look out, that top layer of soil that they can see look dry, and so they think, well, it's time to water again. And in that case, you can actually overwater. So what you need to do is dig down a little bit with your hands and see if the soil is moist. It doesn't need to be sopping wet. It doesn't feel moist, doesn't feel like it has some moisture retention in it. Now, if it does, then you're fine. Leave it. And actually having that top layer of, if you read Steve Solomon's book about gardening without water or very little water, he talks about having what he says a layer of dust mulch. And now, if you're going to do it this way, you've got to give your plants space. You cannot do a bio-intensive garden this way. But if you're giving your plants space, if you have a bigger area for a garden and you have everything a little bit more spaced out, then that top layer of dust mulch, which is basically just the top layer of soil that goes dry, can actually keep the soil underneath moist. Like it can keep it retains more water. So that's why you can't just look at the top layer. You've got to dig down and see what's underneath. So if there's still moisture in the soil, and you can also gauge like how much moisture is in the soil, but if there's still moisture in the soil, then you're probably fine. You don't need to water today. If it seems dry or dusty, in my case it can get purely dusty, but if it seems dry after you've dug down a little bit, then it's time to water again, because that means that the water is starting to run off deeper down into the ground. So water your plants, and then when you think it's time, before you do it again, and you'll get used to your land and your garden and what its needs are. But before you water again, make sure you're digging down, checking to see, is the soil underneath the top layer that I can see wet? And when I say wet, I don't mean sopping wet. I mean, is it retaining water, or is it dry also? If it's still retaining water, then don't water again. If it's dry, then it's time to water. So that's just something to keep in mind. Now this does not, I'm not talking about trees here, because trees need a lot more water than a annual garden when they're first getting started anyways. When trees get established, you really don't have to do anything. They send their roots down so deep that you don't have to water them constantly. But when trees are first getting established, they need a lot of water. And so this does not apply to that. With new trees, you almost need to water till you think you can't water anymore. So, I mean, because new trees need gallons and gallons and gallons of water. But it's the same concept though. You're trying to train it to send its roots down to search for what it needs to survive. So this advice doesn't apply to trees. It applies to just a standard garden bed. Again, it does not apply to bio-intensive gardens either, because they need more water because everything is so close together. And this doesn't get into things like fertilization or fertigation, which fertigation is a combination of fertilizing and irrigating at the same time. And you can search. I'm sure I'll talk about that at some point. I don't particularly do that a whole bunch. I tend to just fertilize and then water. But I do use liquid fertilizers, and so you're mixing it. You're cutting it with water. So in a sense it's fertigation, because it's not pure fertilizer, it's fertilizer mixed in with water. But there are people who, when they irrigate, they also fertilize. So it's never one or the other, it's always both. And that I don't do. I don't do that. Most of the time I'm just watering, and then I time when I need to fertilize. And I do a lot of foliar feeding. I fertilize the soil and prepare it before I plant things, but once things get established, I pretty much rely on foliar feeding and liquid fertilizers and stuff like that. So, but that's just a little I guess my 2 cents on watering, and it's not, this is based on things that I've learned and other more learned gardeners than myself, and what they have said and what I've found that works. So always take it with a grain of salt, and always again, this doesn't apply to every area. This applies to Florida gardening, and this may not apply to every area in Florida. This applies to the area that I'm in. So take it and learn to work it in with where you are. But that's about it for today. Again, I'll be out in the garden showing more soon. I just didn't want to show the same thing over and over again. But things are starting to grow, so hopefully I'll have more action to show you soon. So until next time, thanks for watching. Please like and comment and subscribe. Share it with your friends, and I will see you all pretty soon.